Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a two-part discussion on the strategic considerations around first-in-human studies for medical devices. I'm joined by the one and only Dr. 𝗂𝗏, who is a veteran of numerous first-in-human studies, and 𝗂𝗏 will actually share some absolute pearls of wisdom with you on this topic. So let's get right into it. 𝗂𝗏, what are some of the typical objectives of conducting a first-in-human study?
Well, study generally is recommended. It's never quite recommended to discover if the therapy or the approach to the therapy warrants further investment. I believe, and it's a philosophy, and some people may disagree, but I believe that if a device is going to fail, you probably want it to fail fast and fail early. This way the company has time to recover, to redesign without having to spend a lot of money and time pass. By that very definition, right, the test device in a first-in-human study is usually not in its finished commercial form. But they are really a working engineering prototype that is safe to be used. Sometimes I've seen a system put together with using off-the-shelf components, and they will have a few engineers to run the system and monitor and operate the device in this first-in-human or proof-of-concept study. But functionally, in general, you want the early prototype to have the same basic function as the final intended device.
That makes sense. Okay, so in saying that, what should manufacturers consider in deciding to do a first-in-human study?
Well, some of the considerations in deciding whether you need a first-in-human studies are, now, is the therapy or diagnosis a novel approach? Or is the device a me-too device? For example, if you are developing another coronary stent, you don't need a first-in-human study. Because the procedure is well laid out, and the stent's property by now has been studied over and over again, so you don't need to do a first-in-human study. Now, but if the approach, a problem could be well researched, but if you're approaching it in a different aspect, then and the approach is novel, or it's a new treatment, then I would recommend that you do a first-in-human study. Sometimes people do first-in-human study not because to study the device, but because they need certain anatomical information they can't get from literature, and so you use your best guess and best estimate based on literature and animal study. And then you do a first-in-human study to confirm whether you guessed correctly. This is especially true if the device may or may not contain features that you can adjust real-time during the actual procedure itself. A classic example is that if you are doing a percutaneous mitral valve replacement, and you're coming in transseptal, that angle of approach, you might guess, okay, I think I can come in at an angle of approach of maybe 110 degrees. But what you do not know is that whether your catheter can make that turn. So something like this, you might probably want to do a first-in-human sometimes just to be able, it may be an acute study, just to be able to see if you could place your mitral valve. That's an example.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay. So this is a multi-part question. So at a high level, what is the process to pursue a first-in-human study? Where would you start with your plans, and what information is enough to start operationalizing one's strategy? Now, what are some of the key areas that manufacturers tend to ignore when strategizing for a first-in-human study?
That is a lot of questions.
I know.
I'll try to help break it down, and I think some of it I kind of move into the next question.
That's fine.
Okay. One of the things is that all devices used in the first-in-human studies must meet design control principles.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that actually many sponsors are surprised that they have to be done under design control. Absolutely, they have to. This means that you must still reduce the risk to as low as possible.
That's a really important point.
The prototype, you got to find ways to compensate for the early prototype. And an example, and it's a very common thing, is to have more than one engineer set it up, monitor the system during the procedure instead of getting the site PI to do it. Another example would be usually this kind of device, early device, usually has been developed with the help of a doctor. So the physician that helped develop the procedure will be generally you will want that person there to help proctor the PI or even maybe perform the study, the first study at all. So that is those are some of the things you want to take into consideration. Now, manufacturer has a moral and ethical obligation to the ethics committee and the patients to ensure their safety to the best of their ability. That is the bar that you have to meet to the best of your ability. And even in this small first-in-human study, the probable benefit must still outweigh the risk of study participation. Okay, that hasn't changed. It may be in a different manner, but it hasn't changed. And first in a human study should also be conducted under good clinical practice. Because the information is reportable to the regulatory bodies, the concept is successful. Even if eventually your device is different, this information will be considered material, unless you completely go from valve to, say, a urinary product. They are drastically different. But unless they are very drastically different therapy, different site, all this information is reportable. Okay. Now, poorly run studies with unsafe devices in the first human studies will haunt the program for a long time, and possibly the rest of your device, rest of the regulatory life of the device, because every time you do a filing, a submission, all the material information needs to be included. And if the first in human study, as I mentioned earlier, is considered material, so you might have to report that, even though you think I don't need to report, but that's incorrect. You do have to report that, right? So what do you need? Well, this is my recommendation. You find a site that has good clinical study support staff. You got to have the clinical study support staff got to be really, really good, because more than regular studies, you need this person to be flexible and to collect a lot more data than you normally would, because you don't know what works and what doesn't work, right? You find a CRO that is comfortable and used to managing first-in-human studies, because the CRO needs to be flexible. They need to be adaptable. You don't want a CRO that's very rigid, who only does drug study or who only does pillar study, and they get scared by some of the things that you do in the first-in-human and make it really overly burdensome for you. While we have to meet the first-in design control, it doesn't have to be burdensome.
Right.
And lastly, and maybe the most important thing, is to have a PI that is calm and willing to refine the procedure technique with you in the first-in-human. Remember, part of the objective of first-in-human study is to develop a procedure. So you don't want a PI who is easily upset or worried, or you are somebody who's worried about all kinds of things. Things happen. You can always try your best, but the unexpected can happen, and you must be able to anticipate that, and you must be able to manage that ad hoc, as it comes along. So the choice of the PI is pretty important.
Excellent points, right? You need to have a PI who's willing to be a true partner, You need to be working under the aegis of your risk management. You need to be conducting the study under good clinical practice. You need to have a vision to the benefit risk considerations, even though it is a first in human study and even though it helps you fail faster, so to speak. A lot of points I want to explore a little bit more. I want to talk about the CGMP aspects as well as some of the other items, but I'd invite every one of you, including Dr. 𝗂𝗏, to join us in part 2 of this discussion. Excuse me. Thank you very much.